I have the greatest honor of introducing our speaker today. He is an amazing gentleman, and the presentation will talk volumes, and you'll get to know and understand him a little bit. Without any further ado, ladies and gentlemen, we've got Professor Clarke Scholtz on the line. Born and grew up in the wilds of Bechuanaland, the Protectorate, back then when Botswana used to be under the British leadership. We now obviously know it as Botswana. Tamed at Kimberley Boys High School, educated at the University of Pretoria, graduated with a BSc, MSc, and a PhD qualification. He was appointed in the Department of Entomology at the University of Pretoria in 1977, where he spent 13 years as head of Department of Zoology and Entomology. Professor Clarke has published over 230 research papers and some books on South African insects and dung beetles. In 2016, he tried to retire, but with the wealth of his experience and knowledge, it's just not possible. He continues to teach undergraduate students, supervising postgraduate students. He continues to write papers and books, including the newly released Pollinators, Predators, and Parasites, the ecological importance of insects, which is the point of discussion today. Prof, it's amazing to have you. Thank you for all the work that you do. We're really excited and we're really privileged to have you on the line with us. Now, ladies and gentlemen, before I hand over to Prof, please note that this live session is also being shared live on our Facebook page, the Struik Nature Facebook page, as well as Kirstenbosch National Botanical Garden Facebook page. So if anybody's unable to jump onto the line and perhaps maybe they're trying to reach out on this line and unable to do so, please refer them to our Facebook page. Without any further ado, Prof, the floor is yours, and to everybody else, I will see you guys on the other side. Prof, take it away.
Thank you, John. Good morning, everybody. I have the great privilege of being able to talk about my favorite subject here to everybody this morning. John has already welcomed you all formally. I'd like to just add one more person to the list, and that is one of my fans, my 93-year-old mother, who is also watching. So, hi, Mom. I hope this is not going to disappoint you. Right then, without further ado, I'd like to talk a little bit about the ecological role of insects in Southern Africa. I think, most people have the association of insects being pests. So we've tried to dispel that notion in this book. And if you consider that South Africa has probably about 100,000 species of insects, 100,000 different species, of which only 50,000 odd or so have names. And if you consider that there are only 700 or 800 species of birds and 300 odd species of mammals, so insects are orders of magnitude more abundant. And of course, their abundance also translates into their importance. So they're important for many different aspects, and those are the aspects that we're going to be talking about today. Just a brief word about my two collaborators, Jenny Scholtz on the left there, who has a background in conservation, and she's kept her eye on the conservation aspects of the book, as well as she was responsible for the design of the outlay from our point of view, so that we linked whatever photographs there were to the text to make it appropriate. And then Henny de Clarke on the right is a natural history photographer, a metallurgist by training, but a natural history photographer for a lifetime, of which many years have been spent studying insects through the lenses of his many cameras. And he is also very, very knowledgeable about general natural history. So those are the people who have contributed substantially then to the production of this book. Right, because insects are so diverse and because the regions in South Africa are so diverse, we needed to compartmentalize the groups of insects that we were going to talk about. So we decided to use the natural environmental regions in South Africa, the biological regions called biomes. They're mostly defined on vegetation structure, but then of course vegetation is determined by soil type and then also by climate. So biomes then are a combination of vegetation type, soil and climate, and the different biomes have completely different suites of insects. So within each biome, we then divided it further into the groups that we're going to be talking about. I'd just like to very briefly go through them first. Then the FYNBOS biome, which is one that's familiar to many of you. I'll go through the details again when I get to them. The succulent KAROO biome here along the west coast, the NAMA desert, which is all the way up mostly in Namibia, the NAMA-KAROO, the big central KAROO basin of South Africa, or the grassland, also known as the Highveld, and then the mountain backbone of the Highveld. The savanna, the biggest of our biomes, the bushveld, well known to all of you, and this is where most of our big national parks lie. Indian Ocean tropical belt, a small belt along the east coast of KwaZulu-Natal and into Mozambique. The Albany thicket, a small region in the Eastern Cape, around about Grahamstown and the Makanda, sorry, and the Addo Elephant Park. And then the forest biome, our smallest biome, but one of the ones with the highest levels of unique insects. Oops, I skipped one, I think. The forest biome, sorry, the forest, yeah, this small region, there we go. No, I seem to have covered them all. Okay, so then what we did was we divided them up into the major ecological groups, major groups from a biological point of view. So pollinators, I just give you some very simple statistics. About 70% of our indigenous plants are pollinated by insects. And so if you consider that we have such a high diversity of plants, particularly in the FYNBOS, which we'll get back to consider that 70% of those are pollinated by insects. So no pollinators, no beautiful proteas and various others. Predators, about 25%. I mean, obviously there are a lot of insects that depend on plants. So a high percentage of insects are predators that feed on the other levels of insects. Parasites, these include parasites of other insects, but also parasites of vertebrates, mammals and birds and that sort of thing. Also a very important system. And then ecosystem engineers, I'll talk about them in a little while, but ecosystem engineers are basically biological organisms that modify the environment to such an extent that they make the environment suitable for the occupation or use by other organisms. So it's not just a matter of an insect eats a plant, the insect rather drills a hole into a plant, then leaves the hole, and then some other insect or some other organism then moves into the hole. So then it has become engineered by that insect. And then keystone species are insects without which ecosystems would either collapse or change dramatically. Right, then just briefly, pollinators. This is one of our very interesting butterflies. The Table Mountain, sorry, let me just try and get this out of the way. Table Mountain Beauty, one of our big butterflies. It's interesting from the point of view that it sees mostly red flowers and it's attracted to red flowers. Most other insects see mostly in the white and blue parts of the electromagnetic spectrum. But these butterflies are unusual, and that the fact that they see red, and they pollinate a number of red flowers, including some of our really spectacular dicer orchids, but also some gladioli and various other red flowers. So pollinators are undoubtedly one of the more important groups. Then some of the unusual pollinators, or some of the typical pollinators, depending on your point of view, that are some of the major groups. This is a group of lacewings, paddlewing lacewings, which I'll get back to. They are a part of the unique pollinator fauna in NAMA-KAROO. This rather angry looking wasp is one of a big group of pollinators. Many flies, such as this bee fly, are also pollinators. And then, of course, the more familiar, but as I mentioned, about 25% of our insects are predators. This is a group that belongs to a big group called ground beetles. All of them have defensive glands in the tip of their abdomen, and they can squirt out all kinds of chemicals. Some burn, some stain skin. One of the Afrikaans colloquial names is oogpister, for obvious reasons, for those of you who know a little bit about the origin of some Afrikaans words. But then insects are particularly interesting, not just from the point of view that we'll be discussing today, but you can deduce so much about the insect just by looking at it. And this robber fly, for instance, you'll notice that it has this fringe of bristles around its mouth. It's called a moustache or a mustax, and that's there to protect them from getting their teeth kicked in when they catch prey, and they can hold on to the struggling prey without damage to their mouth parts. Blood is not always thicker than water in insects. Here we have a big dragonfly eating a smaller cousin. All dragonflies are predatory. Then to some of the parasites. This is a vertebrate parasite. Parasites are divided into ones that live permanently on their host, such as this blood-sucking louse, pig louse on a warthog. There's some similar ones that occur on humans, for instance. You probably know about head lice in children. That's something closely related. But some are called intermittent parasites or partial parasites or temporary parasites, such as this. This, as you can see, is a flower-frequenting fly, a horsefly. But just to get back to this fly, you can see that it's visited a flower. This is a female. Females and males suck nectar. This one's also covered in pollen, but then the females need to suck blood to get a protein meal before they can develop their eggs. This particular one is sucking my blood on my leg while Henny is fiddling with his camera, and I was saying nasty and rude words for him to hurry up because, of course, the bite is painful. This is one of our very spectacular parasites. The fly on the right is Africa's biggest fly, and its larvae live inside the gut of our two rhino species. It's a large parasite, the length of your thumb, and they sometimes have hundreds of these. An early French explorer and hunter who shot a black rhino, when he opened it up, it had buckets full of, as he said, buckets full of maggots in its gut, and he said he thought that might be the reason why rhinos were so bad-tempered, because they walk around with a gut full of parasites. But remember, the conservation of rhinos is not only about the conservation of rhinos, it's also about the conservation of the fauna that goes with it. And if the rhinos go extinct, so does this magnificent fly. Then ecosystem engineers, as I said, these are the ones that modify an environment to such an extent that they change it in some way to make it suitable for habitation or food or something else. So some kind of modification of the environment. All those brown specks you can see there are termites, of which those of you who live in on the Highveld in South Africa and in the more westerly drier parts of the country will know them well. They're called the small harvester termites. The mounds vary from the size of a football up to about the size of a dining room table or so. And the termites themselves are very important in improving the nutrition of the areas where they occur, but they also lived in, the mounds are also lived in by various other little animals. We'll talk about those. In the savannas, these are fairly obvious landscape signs where you'll get a big termite mound like this with a lot of vegetation on it, big trees often. These form what are called termite islands, and these are particularly important from an ecological point of view, especially in wetland areas. This is the Okavango delta where the low-lying areas are seasonally flooded. But then what you can see here is different sizes of termite islands starting to form. Small ones, slightly bigger, even bigger, and then much bigger. And eventually you get some that are many hectares in extent. They all start off as a termite mound. Birds perch on them, they drop seed blows in, small animals like rodents carry in seed, and eventually establish the island. The islands then attract, as you can see from the paths, bigger animals, rhinos, elephants, that sort of thing, which use the paths. They use the islands as areas of dry land during the wet season, but also for food. So their trampling and their manuring also then increases the size of the island. So what started off as a termite mound eventually becomes a whole ecological island. And of course, they're also occupied by many other animals, from small animals, insects, rodents, reptiles, right up to big monitor lizards, these dwarf mongooses. The temperature inside the mounds is moderated. It never gets very hot or very cold. The climate in there is generally, the humidity stays fairly high. The mounds are very hard, so they're protected. And so it's generally a favorable environment. And then also you get secondary predators like aardvark that dig into these mounds to get to the termites, and then they make big cavities which are then occupied secondarily again. So once again, the termite mound starts off, it modifies the whole, whoops, there's a hand raised. Must I respond?
No worries, Prof. We'll take all questions at the end of the presentation.
Okay, sorry, Anna Marie, we'll get back to you. Right, and then keystone species, one of the most obvious ones then are pollinators. This is the ubiquitous honeybee, probably the most important pollinator in natural and in agricultural ecosystems. Of the 70% of our plants that are pollinated and the crops that are pollinated, many of those would be pollinated by the honeybee. And then insects are not only important from the points of view that I've already mentioned, but they're also very important as food for many other organisms. Just to go back, or just to if I may, just to go back very quickly to these termite mounds. These termites, these small harvester termites, are the principal food of mostly the aardvark, the pangolin, and they're about 95% of the food of the aardvark. So incredibly important. So they are certainly keystone species. Here you can see a hoopoe and a dwarf chameleon eating insects. They may be highly specialized predators that specialize on a particular type of insect, or they might be more general. But anyway, insects are an essential part of the food of many other animals. And then a nice supper time conversation is the importance of dung beetles and other dung insects, but mostly dung beetles on the removal of dung. I think most people don't realize just how important they are. I'll just give you a simple statistic that you can quote at your next cocktail party. There are 15 million cattle in South Africa, and they produce about 500,000 tons, 500,000 tons of dung every day. Now, a ton of dung is roughly a cubic meter, 1 meter by 1 meter by 1 meter. So if you think of a big box of that size on your lounge carpet full of dung, 500,000 of those are produced per day in South Africa by cattle only. Then we have, for instance, in the Kruger National Park, 10,000 elephants, each producing about 150 kilograms of dung each, 30,000 buffalo producing about 20 kilograms of dung each. What becomes of it? Most of it is buried by dung beetles. We would be neck deep in trouble if it wasn't for the dung beetles. So they're incredibly important in any ecosystem. Then right down to the last animal remains, are the food for many insects. This is a particular group of beetles distantly related to dung beetles. And they feed on the last remains of carcasses. So here, these ones are they feed mostly on the keratin, the hair and the hooves and horns. No vertebrates can digest keratin, and only a few insects can. And this is one of those that can. One of the next ones is another one that can. Many of you will have seen this sort of thing in game reserves, on game farms, old horns with these tubes appearing to be growing out of them. Well, what these there are small moth larvae tunneling inside the horns, busy eating the horn matter, the keratin, and then they spin these tubes, they add to it with their feces and silk until eventually they have a tube about 2 centimeters, a centimeter to 2 centimeters long, in which they eventually pupate. And those of you who have better eyesight than me might be able to see the tips are the pupal cases of the moths that have remained. So right down to the last horns are eaten by insects. Right, pardon me. Then just to get down to the biomes themselves, the FYNBOS biome, familiar to many of you. It's one of the Cape floral region, one of the world floral regions, the Cape floral region, one of only 6 in the world, with very high endemicity, about 8,000, 1/3 of the species of plants in South Africa, about 1/3 of them or so occur in the FYNBOS, and many of them are endemic to the FYNBOS, and a high percentage of them depend on insects for pollination or some other aspect of the ecology. One of the aspects is that many of the plants that belong to the big family to which proteas and pincushions belong produce seeds with an edible piece, an edible body attached to it. The edible body is highly desirable to ants. It has no physiological function. The plant doesn't need it for any of its own functions. These seeds drop. This body is called an iliosome, basically a fat body full of proteins and fats, highly desirable to ants. Ants then carry these seeds to their nests. They eat the iliosome off, and then the seed is left inside their nest where it's planted. It's safe from fires and predators like rodents. And also it's planted in a nice, rich humus environment where all the other rubbish that the ants, organic rubbish that the ants deposit. So it's planted in a suitable environment. But there's a major threat to our native ant species, and that is the introduction of this bottom right-hand one, the so-called Argentine ant, imported, we think, from Argentina during the Anglo-Boer War 120 odd years ago or so. And it's an aggressive tramp species. It's busy displacing our native ants, and it doesn't have the same effect of protecting and planting the seeds of many of our native plants. So what they do is they take a long time to find the seed, whereas our ants are home in on them very quickly. They're familiar they know what to expect. So the Argentine ant is busy disturbing the native ants to such an extent that the seeds then remain on the soil surface without being buried. If the Argentine ants do find them, they eat the ilisomes off, but don't protect the seed in any way. So here we have a large environmental and conservation problem right here on our doorstep. And then some of the restio plants. These are one of the characteristic groups of sort of grass-like plants, the Restioneaceae in the Cape. 2 of the species have developed a very cunning method for getting their seeds dispersed. Rather than get them dispersed by ants, they produce a hard nut rather than the more typical seeds, and the nut smells like dung. It does into to humans, and the chemicals have been analyzed by some colleagues at the University of Cape Town and found to be very similar to that of antelope in these areas. So the dung beetles are fooled by the shape and the texture. You will have noticed that The previous seed is shiny looking, doesn't have a rough texture. It also looks as though it could be handled more easily by ants. This one is perfectly round so that it can be rolled. It's got a rough texture so that the beetle can hang on to it, and it smells like dung. So the beetles are fooled. They roll the seed away, go and bury it, then try to eat it, and of course find that it's not a dung pellet, and then leave it buried in the soil where it's then planted and protected. The succulent Karoo biome is another one that's familiar to many tourists who come to South Africa, up the west coast of South Africa, which is spectacular floral displays in summer. High floral numbers means high insect abundance and importance. This is one of the most species-rich floral deserts in the world, especially succulents, and all of them have an association with different kinds of insects. I'm not going to talk about pollinators here. Here I'm going to talk about another group of insects, termites, which modify the environment in the succulent Karoo to such an extent that large areas of it are transformed completely. This is called a harvester termite. It's one of a few species called harvester termites, but most of their mounds are underground. These ones don't form those big typical mounds above ground. And so most of their activity is underground. They carry in sticks and grasses and seeds and whatnot into their nests, where they then feed on it and release nutrients. But one of the aspects is that they have multiple exits from their nests. The nests are huge, and they may stretch over hundreds of hectares in a particular area. And every few meters, they have a foraging burrow. And where these foraging burrows form, if the soil is moist, it coalesces. So you get some of these piles actually start accumulating over many years, and then they start to look like a termite mound. They're actually not mounds in the true sense of the word. The termites don't live in them. They're just soil accumulations. But they have a major effect. They're called heuveltjies, which is an Afrikaans word for little hills, also called hillocks, something along those lines. But heuveltjie is a term that is used mainly internationally. And as you can see, the plant structure around each of the heuveltjies is completely different. And that's because of the differential nutrient changes that the termites introduce, the moisture changes, and the soil changes, because they're perpetually and continually bringing up different soil from below the ground. This is what they look like from the air. The one in the foreground here is a forming heuveltjie. That one, for instance, is an older heuveltjie, and then there's some others in the distance. These have been forming over the last 20,000 years or so. And those of you who've ever been to central Karoo near Van Reinsdorp, the famous landmark there, the Gifberg Mountain, all these yellow circles are heuveltjies, mostly old heuveltjies of hundreds of tens, at least of thousands to tens of thousands of years old. But as you'll see that the vegetation on them is quite different because of those reasons I mentioned, but also the heuveltjies are more nutritious, so they attract more nutritious types of plants, which makes them more attractive to plant feeding animals. Sheep, for instance, preferentially graze on heuveltjies rather than on the inter-heuveltjies, but rodents are attracted, other animals are attracted. They then modify the heuveltjies again, and then convert it eventually into something completely ecologically different. And so here you can see, so you can imagine the effect of the termites on the landscape here is huge. Insects go, but they are spectacular, and they're important pollinators of special flowers, floral vegetation in the Western Cape. They're called paddlewing lacewings, the paddle wings, as you can see. This group of insects has these highly modified hind wings. They vary a lot, and the hind wings have all kinds of functions. They are used to increase their mimicry, their blending into the environment. Big ones like the one on the top right there are used for signaling. They signal to each other. They also, that's also when they land in amongst dead leaves and that sort of thing, increases their visibility. And all of these then have these very interesting adaptations and major, they are insects of major importance once again in the, to this succulent karoo. And then the Namib Desert, the desert biome, most of which is in Namibia. Those of you who have ever been to Sossusvlei will know these are the highest dunes in the world, up to about 300 meters or so in height. The central area is called the Namib Dune Sea for obvious reasons. Much of it is just wind-blown sand. The formation of these is very, unfortunately, we don't have time to go into it, but they have, the dunes have a very interesting dune insect fauna, one of which is this group of beetles called darkling beetles or tenebrionid beetles. They're closely related to the famous South African tok-toki beetles, the ones that tap. These are not tok-tokis, but anyway, they belong to the same group, a big group of beetles. All of them have modifications for either avoiding heat or living in the sand or cooling. The one on the top left there has holes, it opens its spiracles, which are breathing holes on the sides of its abdomen, and then runs fast over the dunes and air cools itself. So the faster it runs, the more it air cools itself, a bit like those of you who ever drove an old Volkswagen Beetle would know that Volkswagen Beetles cooled in this way with an air-cooled engine. The one on the right has long legs and it's active during hot part of the day. As the sand heats up, it stilts, it stretches its legs until it's walking right on its tiptoes. And just that 15 millimeters in which the body is raised off the sand surface, there's a difference of temperature of about 15 degrees. So the soil temperature might be in the region of 55 degrees or so. The beetles' body temperature will be around 40. So that's about the maximum temperature that their bodies can take. The one on the bottom left is a flying saucer beetle, as you can see from the name, flat, and they are adapted for swimming in the sand. So they dive into soft sand and they can actually swim, spend most of their time in the soft sand. The one on the right is a very small beetle and it is mottled in this way because it looks, they run very fast when sand is blowing across the dunes, and in the sand there are of course sand grains blowing, but also bits of plant matter, leaves and sticks and seeds and that sort of thing. These beetles run around active when the wind is blowing, but they camouflage to look like the wind-blown detritus that's floating around with them. The NAMA-KAROO, a big area in the central part of the country. Many of my non-entomological, non-biological friends drive through it and say, what a terribly boring place. You drive all the way from Colesberg to Cape Town and all you see is karoo. In fact, it's fantastically biologically interesting. One of the more interesting groups of insects are these ants. They are seed or plant feeding ants, and as the name implies, they forage on plant bits and seeds and then carry them back to their nests, where they eat some of it and then the rest is thrown onto a rubbish dump around the nests. And many of the seeds that are dumped on these are viable seeds. And then the next time it rains, of course, they germinate. And once again, we have a case of the seed in a protected, humus-rich environment where germination, and these are the karoos, these are nutrient poor soils, so the ants improve the nutrient quality of these areas dramatically, and they're up to many of these ants per hectare, so they have a significant effect on the soil quality. This is just a slight aside, just of biological interest. One doesn't often see them because they live in close association with ants. These are related to that one of the ground beetles that I showed you early on in the talk. These are so-called ant nest beetles. All of them have these funny antennae, and those antennae have glands, special glands that offer ants appeasement substances. So they're highly attractive to ants. So the beetles fly to an ant nest and then they land outside. And the ants come running to find out what the commotion is about. And then they find these beetles sitting there with these lovely secretions. And the ants really like the secretions. And in response for that, they then carry the beetles into the nests. They then use these, the antennae also as handles. So they give them something to grip onto, drag the beetles into their nests. And then, but the beetles have a devious motive because the beetles then eat ant larvae. They also lay their eggs in there, and then their larvae, which also produce appeasement substances in the nest to keep the ants happy. The larvae then also feed on ants in the nest. So these are highly adapted for living only inside ant nests. And then one of the famous or infamous, if you like, migratory locusts, a pest locust, although it's not a major pest in South Africa anymore because it's controlled. But it has a relative, it has many relatives in other parts of Africa, one of which is the locust of biblical importance. And it's currently, and has been for about the last 6 months or so, a major pest in mainly Northeast Africa. There are people are harvesting them in one part of Kenya, hundreds of kilograms of them at night when they're sleeping, and they're drying it and turning them into animal food. So they have other ecological importance as well, but of course they consume a lot. This is the start of a migration. The eggs hatch in the Karoo, and then the young immatures then congregate together. They're a sort of reddish orangey color. It looks like red water flowing across the roads. You get these millions of them all advancing, and nothing stops them. They just go around any obstacles, eat on their way. And then after a month or so, they mature and then start to fly. And then that's the pest stage. They then fly into areas in South Africa, in the more northern grain growing areas, such as in the sorghum field, where they then become pests. But they have, of course, of major ecological importance because of their return of nutrients to the soil, but also they form the food of many predators, but also, as I just said, where people can harvest them, they have other uses. The grassland biome, so I see I'm starting to slow down. I'll try to speed up. Grassland biome, this is the highlands in the middle part of the country with the well-known backbone of the Drakensberg in the background. The Highveld of South Africa is home to some indigenous mammals that occurred nowhere else in Africa. And these, of course, also have a host of mammals, of parasites that are associated with them. This is one of them, the black wildebeest, and this cute little teddy bear-like insect on the right is a nasal parasite, a thing about the length of your little finger, and the wildebeest on the right there is trying to dislodge a handful of these from its nasal cavities, from its sinuses, with little success. These live in there. What they do is they attach. Those are not eyes. They don't have eyes. These are the mouth parts, and they attach to the mucous membranes. So about this part of larva is attached, living in the mucous membranes. They scrape the mucous membrane and suck blood. These are respiratory spiracles. So this part of the larva is stuck in the mucus. This part is sticking out, and they breathe in the sinuses. When they mature, they sneezed out, and you get this rather fine-looking fly emerging from them. So this is a group of parasites that's restricted to those mammals. Then the savannas, many of our big national parks lie in the savannas, such as the Kruger Park, Kalahari National Park, etc., an area predominantly with grassland and big trees. One of the major pollinators of one of the important groups, the figs. Our figs, you all know, we eat figs, so does just about everything else that can lay its hands on them. There are many species of figs across Africa, 17, I think it is, just in the Kruger National Park, and all of them have an association of these little wasps with them. Some of them pollinate the figs. So no pollinators, no figs. Those of you who like figs, those crunchy bits in the figs, those are the little wasps. No, I'm just joking. Those are not. The wasps have already left by then. But there's a whole host of different wasps that live inside these. The ones that pollinate the fruit. A fig is actually just a floral capsule. The flowers are inside. It's called a syconium. And these wasps with that length ovipositor get in and pollinate the figs inside the fig flowers inside the fig. These ones parasitize those ones with a long ovipositor, which they then stab through the side of the syconium and parasitize their cousins inside the fig. So there's a whole host of different small wasps associated with it. This is one of the pollinators. That's the fig host on the left. As you'll see in the bottom of the fig, there's a small aperture called an ostiole. These female wasps then, from a previous generation, they mated females, they then fly into these, and then they creep in through the holes in those at the base of the fig. These are small holes. The wasps, it's a hazardous business. They lose their wings, they lose their antennae, they often lose legs and bits of their mouth part, but they get inside and then they pollinate some of the flowers inside the fig, and then they also lay their eggs in some others, and then their larvae feed on them. This is a male. The males also develop from eggs inside the little seeds inside the fig. They have this long telescopic, completely wingless. They don't feed. All they have is this elongated abdomen with which they can mate with females, often their own sisters, inside their seeds inside the fig. So these very specialized groups of small figs. Every species has a different suite of small wasps associated with them. Then the savannas are like Texas. Everything is bigger and better. These are some of the huge tiger beetles that we find there. The dung beetles are also bigger and stronger and more aggressive than any of the others. They vary a lot. They're about up to, I think, 220, 240 odd species in places like the Kruger Park. Eat all kinds of different dung. Dung is very desirable. So there's a lot of action, a lot of fighting about them. These two are having a disagreement about a meal. But the dung beetles not only carry the dung or move the dung and then feed on it themselves, but they also carry with them a whole lot of small flies. The flies ride on the beetles and use the beetle for taxis, for transport to and then they get buried with the dung, and they lay eggs in the dung as well. The Indian Ocean tropical belt, just a small region, as I said, on the northeast coast of South Africa and into Mozambique, highly tropical, as you can see from that. One of the very characteristic insects there is a group of predatory ants called weaver ants, for obvious reasons. They weave leaves together and live inside these patches, these cups, these nests of woven leaves and silk. And you get many of these over a whole lot of adjoining trees. They have very big colonies that spread over a big area. Very aggressive ants, the nightmare of an entomologist, because when you try to photograph them or get close to them, they drop onto you and start biting. How they make the nests is workers get together and they'll test the edge of a leaf, and then if it can be folded over, they start to tug on it, and then they start a whole lot more will join. They then pull the leaf over, and then another worker goes and fetches a larva or several larvae. They squeeze the larvae, which produce the silk, and then they use the larvae as a loom as a shuttle to stitch the leaves together. So it's larval silk, and then these are aggressive predator ants. This is also the region for where we get malaria. One of our main malarial mosquitoes, Anopheles arabiensis, sucking my blood again so that Henny could take a photograph, but here's me getting my own back. This is a tsetse fly, another one of the characteristic insects of that region, sucking blood on Henny's arm. Now, the history of tsetse flies in Zululand is an interesting one, because during from the turn of the previous century until the Second World War, tsetse flies were controlled in various ways, one of which was by killing all the animals that were thought to be a vector of the disease. The disease causes sleeping sickness in humans, but nagana in cattle, and this is a mainly cattle intensive area. So the theory was, if you kill all the animals that are host to tsetse flies, because the natural hosts don't get nagana, then you kill all the animals, then you get rid of the tsetse fly. So there were various projects to eliminate the animals. So animals like these were killed. About 200,000 animals were killed in two sessions over a few years, and all they did was select for a different kind of tsetse fly. So it was a totally unsuccessful venture. And the other thing was that they killed a lot of animals like zebra, which are not host to tsetse fly, but because hippos and rhinos were iconic animals, they didn't kill those, but those are actually host to tsetse fly. So the whole thing was a mess, and tsetse fly and nagana are still with us there today. Then the Albany thicket. This is a small area in the Eastern Cape. And one of the iconic animals there is the so-called addo elephant dung beetle, one of our biggest ball rolling beetles. That's a ball bigger than a tennis ball. The beetle is one of our bigger beetles. It's a flightless dung beetle, and there are all kinds of myths about why it is restricted mainly to that area. The myths were about the fact that it was associated with only elephant dung and that sort of thing. Well, we've dispelled some of those myths, but the elephants certainly increased the amount of dung available for the dung beetles. We also got Parks Board to put up these signs, because people drive over the dung lying on the roads, and when you do, it's mass murder, because often there are hundreds or thousands of dung beetles inside a pile of dung. The forest biome, characterized mainly by the area around Knysna, the Knysna forest. One of the spectacular animals there, one of the spectacular insects, is this keurboom moth, or silver spotted moth. The larvae tunnel inside the wood, and this is one of our biggest and most spectacular moths. There's also a whole history of them. They were collected by various collectors and sold in Europe for a lot of money, and one of the collectors in the Southern Cape at the time actually sold some in Europe, enough to be able to subsidize the building of a church. Then our freshwater habitats, these vary tremendously from large rivers down to all kinds of much smaller rivers, and as small as ponds on farms and that sort of thing. Some of the aquatic animals that are well known are the dragonflies, the dragonflies and damselflies. The damselflies on the left top and left bottom. The larvae are sinuous and have those big gills for breathing in the water. The ones on the right are dragonfly larvae, different size, but all of them are aggressive predators, and important part of the fauna of water. The adult damselflies look like this, and just characteristic, you'll see the damselfly and the dragonflies are both in a similar position. There's a wheel called a wheel position. The males grab hold of a female either behind the neck or the abdomen, and then at least on the neck or behind on the thorax. The males have a secondary set of genitalia on the base of the abdomen. Imagine what you could do with that over a weekend. But anyway, they develop the sperm package there, deposit the sperm package in the secondary genitalia, and then they catch a female. The female then has to retrieve the sperm package from the male in flight. So this is something one often sees called the wheel position during mating in dragonflies. And then the cave habitat, mostly small habitats, but many of ours on the western part of the country have a very unique fauna, one of which is this thread-wing lacewing, a little bit distantly related to the paddle-wing lacewings I showed earlier. Some of them have these long necks, which a friend of ours, Mervyn Mansell, who works on them when he was a student, he used to tell people that they have long necks because he used to keep them in margarine tubs. They have long necks for looking out of the margarine tubs to see what's going on in that. But in fact, they use those. It's a hardened, hard leathery part of the neck, so that when they grab prey, which is by waves, often high salinity, often high solar insolation, lots of hot sun. One of the more spectacular insects, not that, but an insect that's associated with elephant seals, such as this one on Marion Island, are tiny seal parasites that live in the skin of the seal. And what's really amazing about them is that the seals, that they suck blood from the seal, but that they live on the seal all year round. And seals spend about 9 months of the year submerged or partially submerged in very cold water. And also they dive to very great depths, up to more than 1 kilometer. So the water pressure and the salinity is very high and the temperature very low, but these tiny mites, at least these tiny lice, manage to survive those very harsh conditions. Very remarkable animals. And then the last of them is the areas that we've discussed insects from, is this habitat, the urban habitat, familiar to many of you in the Cape. This is Kirstenbosch, and the insects that live in and around them, in the gardens, the parks, in our houses, on ourselves. This is a familiar one to many of you. They're not as cute as people think they are. The females are vicious, and all mantids, praying mantises, are predatory. And in this particular species, the females attract the males, and then when the male gets close, they catch the male and start to eat him. And only a mating, only a male that has his head being eaten off is capable of mating, because he has a mating suppression hormone in his brain. So only when his brain is eaten can he mate. But of course, the ecological reason for that is that the male then is assured of the paternity of the offspring, and also he gives the female a nice big meal, so she doesn't have to go and look for food, and that means that she'll probably lay more eggs and more fertile eggs, so the male's genetics will be continued into the next generation. So it may seem bizarre to us, but from an evolutionary point of view, it's a very successful strategy. Oh, thank you, everybody. I'm sorry, it was a rush. I asked for a whole morning lecture, but Belinda and John were hard on me and said I could only have less than an hour, and I see I've already gone into an hour, so I apologize for that. But special thanks then to Belinda and John, and to Struik for producing this magnificent book. Here it is, just for you to get an idea of it. It is on special for those of you who registered. I can recommend it, of course, but from a technical point of view, it's an exceptional piece of work. It has beautiful photographs. It's technically fantastically produced, hardcover, beautiful photographs, lovely paper, nice large text. So thank you everybody for your attention. There's another talk on the 7th of April, not by me, by somebody else. But anyway, this is just the information that you may need for acquiring a copy of the book. Thank you very much, and have a fantastic day to all of you. Bye-bye for now.
Wow, wow, wow. Prof, this has been an absolutely amazing presentation, and we have you have sparked a lot of interest and questions around. So I don't want to keep anybody waiting. I know a lot of our visitors on the call usually have somewhere else to run off to. So without any waste of time, I just like to take a few questions that have been posed on the line. And let me start with Craig quickly, who's asking, let me just pull this here so that I can see it properly. Says due to the demonizing of insects, which insects are native or beneficial, and which are considered invasive or damaging? Are they good and bad insects? And should we be removing bad ones to keep a balance of good ones?
Thank you. That's a very nice question. And it's one I should have, I actually meant to, but my mind is so scrambled by all the statistics that I was scared I was going to forget. But in fact, only a tiny fraction of our insects are considered pests. Worldwide, there are only about 100 that are considered serious pests, and of those, only a handful occur in South Africa. So most insects are beneficial. We don't need to worry about trying to control them in any way. The pests are controlled by farmers and various other people who know what they're doing. Most insects are beneficial or will have no effect on us. But there are, I could easily have a whole lecture just on the immediately beneficial insects, but the ones I've tried to focus on are the ones that are of ecological benefit, and of course ecological benefit benefits all of us, so those are the ones I've had to focus on.
Thanks, Prof. Just moving right along, David, we've got you covered. The presentation has been recorded and it's actually live on our Facebook page, the Struik Nature Facebook page, as well as Kirstenbosch. So please go on out, like our Facebook page, and this presentation will be there for as long as you'd like to have it. You're more than welcome to share it with your closed loved ones as well. Oriel, she says, I'm hoping Oriel is a lady. Since the start of lockdown and COVID-19, there has been an increase in ants as well as small insects in my home, coupled with the fact that the West Beach area in Cape Town is known for the proliferation of ants in the area. Happily, there has also been a proliferation of moths and butterflies. Can you expand a little bit on this, Prof?
Yeah, I don't think we should go so far as to blaming COVID for the outbreak in insects, but that's probably not the point. The point is that probably with less activity on beaches and that sort of thing, the ants that are probably mostly there would just start to show themselves with more activity, with less activity of people on the beaches. And also, of course, many of these are seasonal. If we've had a particularly warm stretch or a moist stretch or something along those lines, that there would be an increase. Hopefully the increase that we're picking up is because of the lack of different kinds of control, that people are not spraying gardens and that sort of thing. I like to think that that's the main reason for an increase.
All right, sure. Let me just take a couple more, Prof, and to everybody that's still on the line with us, thank you so much for joining us on this beautiful Wednesday talk. As Prof has shared with you, Prof, if you can show us that book again. We have this book available at the Kirstenbosch bookshop. It is probably available on the Struik Nature website as well. So for this week only, you get 15% discount. So please go out, get yourself a copy, because I think there's wealth of information and knowledge in this book. So please go on and get yourself a copy. Leila asked, Prof, should I be afraid of any insects? What's your take on that?
Absolutely not. There are very few insects that can cause you direct harm. Those are mostly bees and wasps and that group that can sting, but most people are aware of those. And then, of course, Malaria is a very serious disease in parts of the country, but there are no insects that you need to generally be afraid of. If something comes and sits on you, just brush it off gently. It's very unlikely to do anything. There are very few insects that can bite or sting. So there's certainly nothing to be worried about.
Awesome, Prof. You know, the questions keep coming on, but I'm just going to jump between questions and comments. A lot of the comments coming up saying, fantastic presentation. Thank you so much. Your wealth of knowledge is just amazing. We're just getting thanks and just words of appreciation from all around. So let me just take perhaps maybe 2 last questions. You know, for the sake of not keeping everybody on the line for longer than we should. Can you tell us, Prof, something about the role of South African dung beetles in Australia? Any ideas on what's happening there?
Yes, I can. There's a long history. South African dung beetles, as well as dung beetles from other parts of the world, but mostly from Africa and then mostly from Southern Africa, were exported. There was a dung beetle research unit based in Pretoria from the late 1960s to the late 1980s, and they bred African dung beetles for export to Australia, because in Australia, the dung beetles that had evolved with animals like kangaroos and that sort of thing couldn't handle cattle dung. And where we have 15 million cattle, in Australia they have, I think it's 50 million cattle, so they have a much bigger problem, and they had no dung beetles, or very few dung beetles, that could cope with it. So they had to introduce dung beetles from other parts of the world, and about 5 species have been spectacularly successful. About 25 species are good at releasing dung, and they've improved the problems in large parts of Australia. But the Australians have started the project up again, and they're now looking for specific species of dung beetles for specific areas in Australia that were not covered by the general dung beetle fauna that was introduced.
Sure. All right, Prof, let me take one more question, before we even jump onto that question, from MJ, we're getting a request for a part 2 of this presentation, so gear yourself up for a part 2 sometime. MJ says, amazing presentation. Thank you, Prof, for sharing your knowledge and passion. And quite interesting, he says, I was wondering, what is your opinion? What's your opinions on insects as a commercial protein source for human, as many businesses are popping up making use of the lower environmental impact of production? Do you think this could improve or negatively impact local insect population for the public? Let me just leave it there. So pretty much, what's your thought on that?
Yes, well, insects have been eaten traditionally in all over the world, of course. They still are in many parts of Africa. In Southern Africa, the mopane worm, pane, moisonia, they have different names in different parts of Southern Africa, have been harvested for many years, and they are dried and sold commercially, so there is a market for them. In South Africa, we are a little bit concerned about over-harvesting of the caterpillars. These are big caterpillars, but many parts of in the Far East, insects are now being developed and bred for human consumption. Insects like crickets, caterpillars, mealworms, that sort of thing. But in South Africa, we also have a flourishing project, or several flourishing projects to use insect bodies for producing high protein feed for livestock, because of it's sustainable to a large extent, and also a lot of the protein that was being used for livestock had other connotations. It was either harvested from the sea, or else it was other animal products. And then there was the BSE in Europe, which which then discourage the use of animal protein. So insect protein is certainly a way to go. There's absolutely nothing wrong with eating insects. A lot of people just don't fancy the idea, but I always tell students, many people eat prawns, but then they pull their noses up at eating mopani worms. Mopani worms eat nothing other than leaves. Prawns eat all kinds of detritus in the sea. And I always tell the students that the biggest and fattest prawns are harvested there where the sewage is pumped into the sea. So what would you rather eat, a prawn from the sea or a mopani worm eating nice green leaves?
Yeah. Prof, oh, thank you so much. I think we've got lots of questions. Questions are still coming up. Great comments coming from all attendees on the line, saying thank you so much for a wonderful presentation. It's been so informative. Everybody's asking for a recording of this presentation, and luckily this recording is available on our Facebook page. So please go on and like the Struik Nature Facebook page, as well as the Kirstenbosch Facebook page. Ladies and gentlemen, there you have it. The book is available on the Struik Nature website, as well as the Kirstenbosch bookshop. Pollinators, Predators, and Parasites. So please go out and get yourself a copy of this amazing book. You will be blown away about with all the information that's inside the book. It's an easy read, it's quite easy to follow, and it's something just quite nice. Everybody that loves hiking, you know, can get a lot of tips. You'll be able to pick up some great knowledge on your hiking tips. There's a lot of information that you can also have on party tables, like Prof shared with us a little bit later or earlier on. So Prof, from my side, thank you so much for giving us your time. Thank you for sharing your passion. Thank you for the great work that you do. I can't believe that you tried to retire. We will not allow you to do such a thing with the level of knowledge that you have. And we are surely going to hold you accountable for coming back here and giving us a part 2 of this amazing presentation. So from myself, from the team that's involved in putting all of this together, thank you so much. We appreciate you, and we look forward to having you again with us soon. Ladies and gentlemen, from my side, it's been an absolute pleasure, and it's a pleasure to have the privilege of introducing this great speaker. We will see you guys again in the next 2 weeks when we host another bi-weekly talk. From now, please remember to sanitize, maintain a social distance, and you know, let's try to do our best to stay safe under the circumstances. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. It's been great. See you guys next time. Goodbye and have a great day, everybody. Cheers, Prof. Thank you so much for all the work that you do. Cheers, everybody. Have a good day.